Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new segment where we're going to be looking at some AI generated cards from Urza's AI here. Pretty cool website. You can go check it out yourself. But rather than just rating the power of the card, I'm going to have some different criteria. I'm going to go over that here. If you'd rather just jump straight into the cards, then use the timestamps below and enjoy that. But I'm going to be rating the cards on three things. First of all, I'm going to be looking at the design. So the DAI do something cool and creative, something new and exciting. Did it keep the card within the color pie and within the general design principles of Magic? So, if it makes a green creature with flying or a blue creature with reach, that maybe isn't where we want to be. And if it's just copying cards that already exist, that's not very exciting either. So we're going to dock a lot of points there. So that'll be our first score is design. The next score is going to be the balance, which is different from power. Because if a card is way too weak, it'll have a low balance score. If the card is way too strong, it'll have a low balance score. We're looking for something that would be on the range of playable, and my criteria here is some sort of limited environment. So if a card is looking at specific synergies, then I'm going to assume, okay, we're doing that synergy in this limited. So this could be anything from, bear with upside to like a pretty powerful rare, but something that wouldn't warp the format entirely around it. And also in this section, I'll be trying to assign a rarity I think the card should be printed at if it were printed. And the final score we'll be giving to the card is the flavor. So does the name and the art and the creature type, do those match up and make sense? Is the flavor text any good? Is the art any good? So this is a pretty subjective one, but I think it'll be fun. Since the Urza's AI does include art and flavor text, it'll be fun to try and rate those. So that's the scoring system. Let's get into it. All right, we've got our first card. It's a weird one to start. Nezumi Drake, 3 and a blue, and then it has text after the mana cost. I think I'm going to go ahead and ignore that. It looks like the AI might have gotten a little bit confused. So we'll just say it's a Nezumi Drake, 3 and a blue. It's a creature type Eldrazi Profane. Well, it looks like an Eldrazi Profane, I'll give it that much. It's devoid, which according to this means this creature can't be blocked except by creatures with flying. That is not what devoid means. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, draw a card. Okay, it's a pretty powerful effect. So let's start with the design. Okay. So we have a Drake, which is actually not a Drake. It's an Eldrazi Profane. That's a little weird. Drakes are usually Drakes, and Drakes usually fly. And this card almost looks like it flies because it thinks the Void is flying. But devoid is devoid, not flying, and the rules text takes priority over reminder text. So if this creature were to actually be devoid, I'm going to have to dock a lot of design points there because that doesn't... It makes sense for Eldrazi to be devoid. That part's cool. But then why is it a Drake? Why is it not fly? So a little bit confused on that front. Whenever he casts a non-creature spell, draw a card. Okay, I mean, we've seen that type of effect before. It makes sense on a blue card. Blue cards like to do card draw, like to do non-creature spells, so A-okay on that front. Yeah, so design-wise, the second line of text is, nothing special, but it is pretty cool. It could get a player excited. And, as a 4-mana 2/2, that's about the power level, I would say, where you'd want that sort of effect. But the Drake not being a Drake, not having flying, randomly having devoid and being Eldrazi, we're gonna have docks quite a few points for, and the design is fine, but mostly uninspired. So I think I'm gonna give this a 2 out of 5 because of all the confusion and yeah, just an ability that we've seen before. All right, balance-wise, so now ignoring all the design problems, let's look at just straight the balance. So we have a 4-mana 2/2 that has devoid, which is mostly irrelevant. Even in the block where the Void was introduced, there weren't too many mechanics that cared about it. But then when you cast a non-creature spell, you draw a card. Okay, so first of all, what rarity would I print this at? I think this would be a rare card. It's obviously, that's not an effect you want to common. You could maybe make this an uncommon build around for some sort of non-creature spell deck, but this feels more like a rare to me. There have been a few rares before that have a similar stat line of 4 mana 2/2 that comes with some cool, pretty powerful ability if you can get it going. Was I think? Ooh, I'm blanking. I'm blanking on the names, but I'll pull some cards up in the edit so you can see what I'm talking about. So I think rare makes sense. It doesn't need to be mythic. It's not like so absurd that we don't want to see it. And yeah, for a rare, I'd say it's like a 4 out of 5 on balance. It's pretty decent, maybe even a 5 out of 5. Like, it's a 4 mana 2/2. It doesn't have any real abilities, so it's quite fragile, but it can get you quite a lot of value. So I think especially in blue, creatures tend to be a little bit smaller. This might actually be a slam dunk in terms of balance. It's just the design's very confused, but balance-wise, 5 out of 5. All right, let's go to the flavor, which let me tell you right now, it's not going to be great. Because once again, we have this confusion of a Drake that's actually not a Drake. It's an Eldrazi. Now, the art, to be fair, looks like an Eldrazi, so I have to give it credit there. That is some disturbing Eldrazi art. So I'll give it at least something for that. The flavor text just says the void, which with a very generous interpretation could be a profound statement, but more likely just looks like it's repeating the rules text in the flavor text, which I'm not a big fan of. So yeah, and this has some overlap with the design, of course, but Drake doesn't fly, isn't a Drake, flavor text sucks. The only thing that it has going for it is cool art, assuming it's an Eldrazi. So I'm going to give it a 1 because of the cool art, but nothing else makes sense. All right, so that's Nezumi Drake in the back. Let's move on to the next card. All right, we've generated our next card. Looks like it's a red spell this time. We got the Breakneck Journey. Okay, I like the name for a red card. 3 and a red for an instant. You may pay red for each creature that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. Oof. This one's not going to score very high, I'm afraid, in any of the categories. Oh boy. All right. So let's look at the design. It's an instant that does absolutely nothing. But it's worse than that because it does nothing while pretending to do something. And that's the AI does this sometimes, and this is far worse than if the card were simply blank. That would already be quite bad design. Obviously, the card doesn't do anything. But this is worse because now the player has had to expend their mental energy to read and process this card to then figure out it actually did nothing. Because if you want, you can pay some red mana anyway. You don't need this card. If you want to tap your mountains, tap your mountains. Mana burn's not a thing anymore. Maybe 20 years ago, this would have some very niche application. These days, not so much. So I'm afraid whoever designed this one is going to have to go back to the drawing board. It's going to get a big fat goose egg in the design score. Balance-wise, I'm afraid it's much the same problem. This is a 4 mana instant that does nothing whatsoever. So even in a deck where you want to cast instants for some sort of value, perhaps with the card we just looked at, the Drake, this would let you draw a card, I suppose, but you want your spells to have effects, generally speaking. Even minor ones would be nice, especially at 4 mana. So this is a 0 on the balance as well, as it just doesn't do anything. And okay, let's look at the flavor. So it's a little bit different from the rest of this. So like I said, Breakneck Journey for a red card. I like the name. Instant, okay, fine. I'm not sure what the art's trying to do here. It looks like some sort of scene from a distance, maybe with some mountains. And the flavor text is so many possibilities, yet so few choices. Ooh, very profound by Stitcher Geralf. So Geralf not traditionally associated with red. Usually you'd have Geralf maybe make some comments in blue or black cards, but okay, it's an interesting statement, and it sort of does distill the essence of this card, right? So many possibilities, and yet actually none of them matter. So actually pretty good. I think they nailed the flavor text. I would maybe attribute it to someone else. And I do like Breakneck Journey as a name for a red card. You know, maybe I would like it to give haste or something. So maybe if we were trying to salvage something out of this card, um, maybe you could have it allow you to give all your creatures haste or pay for a creature to get haste, something like that. And that would make sense. Otherwise, as it is right now, Breakneck Journey, you can just pay a red. It's not quite all the way there, but I think this is like a 3 out of 5 in flavor. It's not bad. I like the name. I like the flavor text. A little confused about the art, and I don't like Geralf on a red card necessarily, but it's an overall good attempt, especially given what you know, what the artist and the flavor text writer had to work with card wise. I think they did a great job. So yeah, 3 out of 5 in flavor. All right, our next one has been generated, and we've got the Granulated Vampire. Okay. Not something you often hear outside of referring to sugar specifically, but okay. Granulated Vampire, 2 mana for a 2/2 flying. Okay. A little small for a vampire, but so far so good. 2 and a black, sacrifice Granulated Vampire. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Oh, I forgot to mention the rarity on the last card, I'm just realizing. Well, I don't know, Mythic, because it's so weird. Alright, anyway, on to Granulated Vampire. So, okay, you know what, this card is actually reasonable here, so let's talk about it a little bit more. So we have let's look at design. Okay, so we got a bit of a smaller vampire. We've had those before. It's not that unusual. Innistrad has featured some smaller vampires in its day. So a 2/2 flying vampire, fairly reasonable. And then, you know, it has an ability that isn't very strong. So I think I would have to dock a little bit on the design for that. And, you know, this sort of, there's that line between design and balance, right? But I think the activate only as a sorcery line makes the vampire not very interesting there. So I think you could keep it at this cost and make it an instant, and that way, oh hey, you know, maybe I can use it in combat. It sort of makes things a little bit more interesting that way. Or if we're gonna keep it as a sorcery speed, maybe make it a bit cheaper. Maybe 1 mana or even no mana, just sacrifice this to give something +2/+2 at sorcery speed. That could be okay. But overall, this is a perfectly playable, perfectly reasonable card. It's not some monumental effort, right? It's nothing groundbreaking that we haven't seen before, but I'll give this a 4 out of 5 on design. It's a little vampire, and you can sacrifice it to buff another creature. Well, I don't know if this falls more in design or flavor, but vampires generally eat other creatures rather than sacrifice themselves. But this is a granulated vampire. Maybe there's some flavor in this set about vampires that, I don't know, fall apart and feed other creatures. So I could see this being a bit of a gray area, but in the right set, I think this could be a perfectly decent card. It needs a few tweaks, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give this a 4 out of 5. Okay, in terms of balance, this looks like a common to me, I would say. You know, it's just your sort of generic little creature, has an ability that, again, like I said earlier, we'd probably want to mess with the mana cost or the timing on it to make it a little bit more interesting to play with. But you know, it's an ability that's not changing the game in too major of a way. So I think common's a good spot for it. I would probably bump the mana cost by 1 because it is a flyer. So 2/2 flying for 2 in black especially is a little bit too cheap. But I think if we just bump this up to a 3 mana card, it's a very serviceable common that you'd be happy to play in a deck that either cares about vampires, excuse me there, cares about vampires, cares about flying creatures, cares about sacrificing maybe. So lots of little possibilities. It could potentially fill a few synergy niches in your limited set. That's pretty cool. Yeah, so it does need a little work, right? We need to change the mana cost and mess with the ability itself. So I'm gonna say 3 on the balance because it's not there. It's clearly got problems, but it's not bad. It's a good place to start. And it's not that hard to fix. We just have to move numbers around. We don't have to make any major adjustments to the card. So yeah, 3 out of 5 balance, not bad. And let's look at the flavor. Okay, so we got the Granulated Vampire. Okay, the name and the creature type match up. I like that. Vampires in black also makes sense. Flying's good. Let's look at the flavor text. Some Posdrit offered to Yavamaya's religious order. I'm gonna hazard a guess that Posdrit is not an actual word, but let me confirm with the dictionary. All right, it looks like it may be a word or two words in a foreign language, but in English it is not. So we have a nonsense word. I mentioned if you have a Maya's religious order, which, unless we're changing things pretty drastically in the lore, I don't think Yavimaya is particularly associated with vampires. So I'm gonna have to say the flavor text is a pretty big miss. The flavor text writer is gonna have to go back to the board on this one. But the card's not a total loss. Like I said, I like the name and the type and abilities sort of match up nicely. The art's a little bit weird, but I can see some particulate. Sort of all this red stuff is. I initially assumed this was blood because this is a vampire, but maybe this is the granulated vampire. It's in a bunch of little bits and pieces. So, not a terrible effort for a strange name. Because the flavor text is so bad, I can't give it too high of a score. Oh man, so it's like a 2 or 3. I don't know if I'm willing to go all the way to 3 just for them getting the very basics right. I think with a generous interpretation of the art, we could bump this up to a 3. So I'll call this one a 3 on the flavor. All right, that's Granulated Vampire. Let's see what Urza's AI has for us next. All right, here's our next card. Once again, we have some text after the mana cost. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but we have the Insatiable Deadly Charge. All right. That doesn't sound like a blue card, but here we are. Insatiable Deadly Charge, 1 a blue instant. Target creature gets +1, +0, +1, and gains flying. Ooh. The AI is having a bad day today. I've played with this site a lot, and it's generated some decent cards, but these ones are... okay, so let's look at the design. We have a blue instant that gives a creature a stat buff, presumably, though it's unclear exactly what it's doing, and it gives it flying. So the flying kind of makes sense in blue, but the problem, of course, here is that this is an instant that doesn't have the words until end of turn, so it's going to be a little confusing to do the casual player, one who's not maybe paying too much attention. This seems like an effect that should wear off, and it doesn't give counters. It just gives that permanently. There's like one other card in Magic's history from like Portal 3 Kingdoms, I think, that gives +2/+2 on Horsemanship. I'll try to bring that up on screen. That has the same run. It's like a sorcery that does it. It's sort of a similar thing. It's not a very good design. So we're gonna have to dock some points for not doing this until end of turn. We're obviously gonna have to dock a lot of points for the fact that it buffs 3 stats when creatures typically have 2. So unless this is a expansion where we've changed some fundamental things about the game of Magic, that's not gonna fly. So we're gonna want to pick 2 of those numbers. I would think +1/+1 balance-wise makes sense, but so yeah. I guess otherwise it's okay, but it's not very inspired, this design, so I'm gonna give this a 1, just because it makes some amount of sense. Like, it's within color pie to give a small buff in flying with a blue combat trick, so they got that part right, but the triple stat line and the fact that it doesn't end at the end of turn makes this design quite poor, so we're gonna give it a 1. All right, balance-wise, it's a little difficult to rate just because the triple numbers mean it's complicated to know exactly what the card's doing, but luckily the numbers are all fairly similar, so +1/+0, +1/+1, or +0/+1 are all in the same ballpark. Obviously, +1/+1 is better than any of the other options, but... so balance-wise... And again, I guess we have to talk about the card as is. So assuming it gives the effect permanently, I would still probably make this a common. And you know, once more, it maybe goes all the way back to our Drake, where we put in our little spells matters deck, and you know, it's not a terrible thing. It's like an enchantment, right? You sort of can think about it as an aura that gives whatever stat line we decide plus flying for 2 mana. It's not horrendous. There have been quite a few cards in Magic's history that granted flying and cantripped. Um, so this, instead of a cantrip, gives you a little bit of stat boost for 2 mana. It's not horrible. I would say it's pretty close in the balance. Yeah, again, the fact that it's an instant is weird, but balance-wise, it's not a problem. So, let's say this is like a 4? There are enough cards that do similar-ish effects, and I would put this at common, not a problem. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, I think there's a card called like Arcane Flight. Has very cool art. I'll try to bring it up here. That does almost the same thing. So yeah, I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5, pending the exact stat line, balance-wise. So not a bad job there. All right, let's look at the flavor. Insatiable Deadly Charge, once again, does not sound like a blue card. That sounds like a red or maybe black card to me. It is an instant. Okay, that makes sense. The lack of ice creatures are nearly spent. I guess they're mad about the lack of ice creatures because it's a blue card. Not getting the connection there too much. So pretty bad so far. I do kind of like the art. It does look like something's charging, and it's quite deadly, right? Whatever this big mess here is, I assume this is the thing that's insatiably deadly charging. So once again, I'm gonna have to give, I think, a 1. I like the art. Art fits the name, but it's off color pie. The flavor text doesn't make much sense. And even the ability, typically a charge wouldn't include flying. That's not, you don't really describe flying as a charge normally. I mean, maybe there's like a charging griffin or something. So maybe, but not really buying it. So we'll give it a 1 because the art's kind of cool. All right, our next card is Llanowar Shaman. 1 and a green for an elf shaman. So far, so good. It's a 1/1. When Llanowar Shaman enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 green elf shaman creature token with tap, sacrifice this creature, add green blue, tap again, sacrifice this creature again, then draw a card. Okay. Well, let's try to break this one down. So let's look at design. We have a green creature, elf shaman, Llanowar elf, makes perfect sense. So it comes in, it makes a little 1/1. So you get 2 1/1s for 2. That's a pretty good deal already. And then this extra token can be sacrificed for something. It's not entirely clear how this ability works, unfortunately. Tap, sacrifice the creature, add green blue. Tap, which is part of the effect of the first sacrifice. Sacrifice the creature, draw a card. So I might need a judge's help to interpret what the heck this would do, but my inclination is that you would get the mana, but then you wouldn't get the card because you can't sacrifice the creature a second time. But we can worry about that in the balance portion. Design-wise, how is this? Well, there's something here in that it makes a token that can make you mana. That's a green effect. That's kind of cool. Of course, the ability being templated in such a strange and convoluted way is really bad, so we're gonna have to dock a lot of points for that. But there's some interesting idea here of this thing generating a token that you can then sacrifice for value. Maybe you can blink this thing in the right set. Keep getting those creatures back and either getting mana or cards or whatever. So that's pretty cool. So I think there's the core of a good idea here, but it's just really confused about the text. So I'm actually going to give this a 3 on the design. I actually think the idea of an elf that comes in with a buddy that then can sacrifice itself for mana effects, that's kind of nice. Since it adds green blue, and Presumably there's something to do with card draw, though we're going to be addressing that in the balance portion. Maybe this itself should cost blue-green, but it's fairly close. I think you could salvage this card into something reasonable and interesting. So I'm going to give it a 3. All right, balance-wise, this card's pretty strong. It would probably be like an uncommon. It's a little weird because it almost wants to be a common because it looks like a card where maybe you have an elf theme and you're just like, I make 2 elves with 1 card and that's going to trigger all my cool elf things. That's neat. But power-wise, it's a little too strong to be a common because of the sacrifice clause on the token. It's able to ramp you by 2 mana. That's already really strong. And then also draw you a card, potentially, depending on how we interpret those rules. So I'm going to give it a common and assume we're going to have to rebalance the numbers or the ability on the token or something. But this is the kind of card you'd like to see multiple copies of so you can find those synergies. Once again, maybe there's an elf synergy, maybe there's some kind of sacrifice synergy. Maybe just for cool ramp, whatever. So it's the kind of card that can fill multiple niches, which I really like on a common. And it's not too complicated if we fix that other text. So I think common makes sense. But it is quite unbalanced, that common, because currently it can ramp you by way too much while still leaving a body behind. So I think this gets a 2 on the balance. We'd have to adjust quite a few numbers, change the abilities around or something to make this reasonable. So yeah, calling this a common and a 2. All right, let's look at the flavor. Llanowar Shaman, Elf Shaman 1/1. That all makes sense. The art's pretty cool. There are 2 figures on it, I think. So we got our Elf Shaman here, and then this, I don't know, Stranger Shaman over there. Let's see what the flavor text is. The scavengers often protect the Llanowar, living in the forest in exchange for sustenance. You know, that's actually sort of on point. If we assume the second figure is not an elf, but some kind of scavenger, maybe we'd have to change the creature type on the card itself. Rather than making you a second elf shaman, it makes you, some kind of critter. That could be cool. It's a cool idea of how the flavor could maybe inform the design a bit here. But I think that this is like solid flavor text. Yeah, maybe needs a little workshopping, but very good start. I like the art. I like the creature type. I like the cost. I think this is a slam dunk flavor-wise. 5 out of 5. No complaints. All right, on to the next card. Okay, and we have our next card, and it is Azorius Spiteful. They're mad. Oh, but it's not at them. It's an instant. Okay, so 2 and a blue for an instant. Untap all permanents you control. Target creature gets +1/+1/+1 until end of turn. I don't know why it's doing this triple stat thing today, but okay. All right. Well, once again, we're going to have to dock some points on design for trying to give 3 different stats to a creature. But what about the rest of it? It's a 3-minute instant in blue that untaps all your permanents. That's fine. That's an effect we've seen before. Yeah, the templating's very bad, right? It should say untap all permanents you control, period. Target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, presumably. That's how I'm going to choose to interpret the card, but we're going to have to dock a lot of points for... That's not what actually the card says. But if we were to have that card, 3-mana instant untaps your permanents and gives 1 creature a small buff. The buff's a little weird on just a single creature, but okay. I think there have been cards much like this in the past, and once again, I'm blanking on names, but I'll try to bring up an image on screen of something that untaps and gives your team a buff, so it's not too far off design-wise. Untap your guys, small combat trick. Seems fine. Not the most inspired design. It's an effect we've seen before, and the templating is weird, so I'm gonna give it like a 2. It did some things right in that, the cost, like it makes sense for a blue effect to untap your permanents, instant that actually ends at the end of turn. That's good. It's like once you fix the templating, it's on color. It's an effect that makes sense, but it's just not very exciting. So give it a 2 on design. You know, maybe try a little harder next time, but it's not a complete disaster. All right, balance-wise, I think once again it's a little inspired. 3 mana on type of permanents. The creature you control gets +1/+1. We've seen similar effects before. They've generally, and again, I'm doing limited ratings here, assuming this is some sort of big limited set. This type of effect doesn't tend to play super well, but it's okay. You can surprise your opponent sometimes. Probably make this an uncommon, because I think that's where these types of things should be. You don't want to be untapping your permanents all the time. You don't want to see a bunch of these floating around, but it's not so crazy that it needs to be a rare. You know, maybe there's some synergies in the set too, where, for example, the inspired mechanic, right, lets you do stuff when you untap, so that could be a cool little synergy. Okay, reasonable. I think 3 mana is a fine price point for this as well. So the card's kind of boring, but I think it's actually balanced correctly. I think this gets a 5 on balance based on similar effects we've seen before. So 5 out of 5, good job, balance team. All right, let's look at the flavor. This is going to be interesting. Azorius Spiteful in instant. Once again, as soon as I read the name, I thought it was a creature, so that's a little bit of a problem there. Let's look at the flavor text. Even this one is now dead. I know what it's like to lose your marrow, and I know what it's like to kill it. Liana Vess. So yeah, is Liana talking about knowing how to kill marrow, or just sort of, I'm killing it because I'm so great? Either way, not seeing how this flavor text relates to the effect. This seems like it should be flavor text that has to do with a removal spell, maybe some sort of weird sacrifice effect. Once again, Liana Vess, traditionally associated with black cards, not blue cards. Just don't love that. Azorius Spiteful. Azorius with a tap makes some amount of sense, but what's spiteful about this? The art's a little weird. Not sure how that has anything to do with untapping your team, or the Azorius, or Spite. I think this actually gets a 0 on flavor, and none of this makes any sense flavor-wise. So I'm going to call this one a goose egg and move on. We have Underling Umbra. Ooh, it's an Umbra that's an enchantment. Good so far. 3 and a blue, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2. Okay. So if you're familiar with other Umbra cards, you may notice this is missing a bit, and that's typically those enchantments have totem armor, which I'll bring it up for you, but it basically makes the creature makes the creature lose the enchantment rather than die if it would die. So you know, that would be nice for this because it's a little bit weak at the moment. It's 4 mana to give a creature +2/+2. So we're gonna have to definitely drop some design points for using the Umbra name without attaching totem armor to it. And otherwise, you know, it's once again a pretty uninspired design. It's just an enchantment that gives +2/+2, which if you're just going to give straight up stats, it's usually not a blue ability. Every color can have auras that buff their creatures in some way, but typically in blue you would get flying or maybe unblockable, you know, something. Some sort of additional ability rather than just a stat boost. Just a stat boost you might see in green perhaps, or maybe in red sometimes, but blue would usually like to have some sort of ability on their aura. So I think we're going to have to dock some points for both of those problems. And once again, not very interesting, right? It's just an aura that buffs a creature. Cool. So I'm going to put this at a 2. It's, once again, you know, if a designer brought this to you, like, okay, maybe go back and try a little harder, but you're not going to fire them on the spot, right? It's not a total disaster. It's just a pretty boring card. It's not, you know, it's not a horrible mistake, but it's a little out of color pie. All right, moving on to balance. This card's quite weak as it stands. 4 mana for a +2/+2 enchantment with no other abilities. Not Not great. Not great. That's really weak. You would want that to cost like 2 if it just get this stat boost, so it's pretty far off right now. On the plus side, it's fixable-ish by we can either drop the cost, we can add totem armor like I talked about earlier, we can maybe have it get flying or something. So there's lots of little levers we can touch on to balance this, but it is currently way too weak. So I think this is also a 2, just because it is salvageable, but it's way off the mark right now. And this would be a common, I think. Just an aura that buffs your creature. Yeah, you'd want to throw this into some sort of aura matters deck, I suppose. Or once we did fix it to give maybe something a little bit stronger, maybe just use it as a generic. Hey, my creature's stronger now. Nothing wrong with that. But too far off the mark. 2 out of 5. All right, flavor. Underling Umbra. Shaman Aura. Let's read the flavor text. A soldier became attached to the hand of a god. Ooh. Some would have sold their lives to acquire it. Okay. I'm kind of getting sold based on the flavor text. I wasn't sure about Underling Umbra. Like, that's a weird name for an aura that gives you a buff, but I guess the flavor is a very powerful entity, right? A god is literally extending their blessing to you, and you're sort of their underling. It has a little bit of a sinister undertone, but I don't hate it. The art's a little bit strange, but maybe we could have this, say this pink figure here is like worshipping an altar or something, the god extending their blessing. It takes a little digging into, but I think the flavor is sort of there. The art could use some help, and maybe we could, if we're gonna keep it in blue, readjust it to be a little less sinister. But there's potential there, so I'm gonna give this I think a 3, because some of the design problems also impacted the flavor, with the Umbra really being strongly associated with totem armor and it not doing it. So yeah, flavor gets penalized for design there. It's gonna happen sometimes. So I'm gonna give this a 3. So overall, not a great card, but not a complete waste. There's something to be salvaged here. All right, on to the next one. So for the next card, those of you who are perhaps observant might have noticed that there is a box here to name our cards. So for these last few, I'm gonna pick some names. Maybe this will mean something to Smashed Like. That would be nice if you could. All right, so here's Smash Like. Red for an instant. I like it. Smash Like deals damage to target creature equal to the number of artifacts you control. Okay. Not a terrible design. It's a red instant that hits a creature. We like those. And it deals damage equal to the number of artifacts you control. So it's going to be something that needs a little bit of a build around, right? It's not going to be good in a deck with no artifacts, obviously. It can't target players, so there's no potential for insane brokenness here with, like, hitting your opponent after you make a million treasures or something. I think we've seen perhaps this exact effect before. I'd have to look through Gather. I will pull up what I find on screen here in the edit, but it's definitely something similar to this we have seen before. So it's not a very original idea, but it's a perfectly serviceable idea for a set where artifacts matter. I think it's totally good design. So yeah, I think this is pretty good. 4 out of 5, just because it's not very original, but it does what it needs to do. Red instant, hit a creature, artifacts matter, all good stuff. 4 out of 5 on the design. Okay, balance-wise, I think similar. This is the kind of effect that, even though it's cheap, you probably can't actually use it early in the game, but a few turns later, you get some artifacts out, you can sneak this in along with something else, so the low cost kind of matters. There's interesting play to be had because, maybe you have 3 artifacts out, you target a 3/3 with this, maybe they have a Shatter in hand that they can play and make it not work, so there's some interesting pull there. Not sure if that fits more into balance or design, but I like that aspect of it. Yeah, I don't think the fact that it costs 1 red is, like, too strong or anything. I'd probably make this an uncommon, just because it is a bit of a build around. Like I said, you can't throw this into any old deck, so you probably don't want this at common because a lot of people wouldn't want it. And then if you do have like, you know, you end up with like 3 or 4 of these in your artifact, that could be a little bit annoying for the other players at the table because it will end up being strong in the right deck. So I think uncommon is the right place for it. A bit of a signal card. And I think it's 5 out of 5 balance wise. It's a perfectly good card. You could slot it right into no, Meriden or something. All right, and finally the flavor. All right, we got Smash Like. We got a bigger robot and some person next to it. The domed discs fell to Earth at the beginning of the eruption, leaving the region of Corliss and her confederates a bit of breathing room. I was liking where it was going at first. We got like some sort of big collapse. Maybe we can tie the artifacts into it somehow. But then it talks about leaving them. The flavor text needs some help, but it's a good start. There's some words that invoke the idea of smashing an artifact. So okay, great. But it's definitely not there yet. The name, even though I generated it, you know, kind of weird. And what is it? There's an automaton in there, which is good because it has to do with artifacts, but I would like to see the art feature more smashing. That would be nice. Maybe this big automaton could be smashing the smaller figure or something like that. So I think flavor-wise, it gets a 2. There's potential, but we have to workshop a lot of ideas. So 2 out of 5 in flavor. Smash like. Smash like. All right. Next card then, to continue with my theme here, will be click subscribe. Let's see what it thinks about that. Alrighty, and here's click subscribe. 1 in the blue for an instant. Click to target instant or sorcery spell or creature spell that targets only creatures and lands you control. Okay, so presumably click would be some new keyword in this scenario. So it'd be nice to have a reminder text for what click does because we've not seen it before, especially on this fairly short card. Click. Okay, so we could imagine click to be a lot of different things, but this can only click instants or sorceries or creature spells that target only creatures and lands you control. So once again, I might need a judge ruling on this, whether if something targets only a creature but not a land, can you cast this spell? Can you click this to a sorcery that's targeting your creature but not a land because it has the end in there? Does it have to target both? Not sure. Be nice to clarify that wording maybe on the card itself. We'd have to figure out what the heck click does. So, you know, if you design me a new mechanic and don't tell me what the mechanic does, not a great start. And, you know, this card's awfully specific. I don't know what click does, but this can only target very specific things, so I don't like that. I'm gonna give this a 1 just because they seemingly came up with a new ability and didn't tell us what it does, and that's a big no-no. All right, balance. I'm probably gonna have to give this a NA on balance, non-applicable, because we don't know what click does, so we can't judge how strong this card is, you know? If click says you win the game, this card's really good. If click says gain 2 life, this card's really bad. So, really hard to say. I think I'm going to just leave that as a non-applicable score for this card because it's just total nonsense. So, flavor. Okay, click subscribe. We've got what looks like Neo Tokyo with a guy on a boat. That's my interpretation of it. Let me know what you think. And we have the flavor text, my witch would sacrifice anything for that snowman. By Lanwin. My witch would sacrifice anything for that snowman. I don't know why that one. That's very silly. I love it. Unfortunately, there's no snowman pictured or implied in either the text or the art. Um, or a witch. Or maybe this person on the boat's a witch. I guess that's possible. And they're doing something for their snowman. Not a lot going on there. Art's interesting, but not clear what it has to do with anything else that's going on. And unfortunately, even though I came up with the name, it's not a very great name, magic card wise. So I'm gonna have to give this a 0 on flavor, unfortunately. But click subscribe. All right, final card. Leave a comment. All right, here's leave a comment, and I almost regenerated this one because it's just nonsense, but it kind of really distills the essence of the YouTube experience. Let's read it. Counter of 2 hours. Then, why no one is actually making money at it? Or, is it worth it? Am I just having a good time in the moment? I'm having a good time. I don't know about you. Oh boy. Well, this is more of a insight into life, I think, than a magic card. So while I appreciate the philosophy behind the sentiment, it's maybe not the greatest magic card, but you know what? I'm gonna give this an honorary 5 out of 5 on design because it makes some incredible insights into YouTube, life in general, and just what you should do in life. So honorary 5 out of 5 on design. Balance, once again, non-applicable as this card. Ooh. I like how a lot of the words are capitalized too, implying there are now keywords. So to is a keyword, y is a keyword, is a keyword. They're very interesting. So yeah, NA on the balance. We won't worry about it. Let's look at the flavor. Leave a comment. It's got some sort of figure walking, perhaps with another one. I'm going to choose to interpret that these are two figures walking side by side, maybe hugging. Down a beautiful road. We got a sunset in the background. It says, even the long dead Keldons were found to eat with a spleen, as well as with one stomach. Okay. So I've mentioned I might need a judge on a few of these. I might need an anatomist to tell me how involved the spleen is in eating. I'm not sure. Stomach certainly is. That's good. Not sure what eating has to do with leaving a comment. Perhaps you could be having a snack while you leave a comment. Even the long dead Keldons did eat, apparently. So that's good. Yeah, not sure where to put this flavor-wise. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if we choose to interpret the rules text as the flavor text, then once again, 5 out of 5. And just to leave this off, let me read it to you one more time because it's very profound, and I think we should all remember the words. Counter of 2 hours. Then why no one is actually making money at it? Or is it worth it? Or am I just having a good time in the moment? And with that, leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.